Jacqueline Teh is a vocalist, songwriter, composer, and educator, and she utterly excels in every area. Her jazz vocal improvisations are simply out of this world. She won a Juno for songwriting on Sammy Jackson's With You EP. Jacqueline's own compositions, I'll mention two here, Did and Fever, have astonishingly original lyrics. As an educator, she's the director of the U of T Small Vocal Jazz Ensemble. She's also director for the St. James Children's Choir Outreach Program in Toronto. On November 6th, Jacqueline will perform at the Jade Music Fest. She will be at Performance Works on Granville Island with other musicians. And the following morning, she will speak at 10:30 a.m. at Performance Works with other Canadian musicians of Asian ancestry. Thanks for joining me, Jacqueline.
Thank you for having me, Charlie.
I'll start with the Jade Music Fest, and it celebrates musicians of Asian ancestry, and you performed last year at the Hollywood Theatre in Vancouver. What was it like for you participating in this festival?
I really didn't know what to expect because it was my first time being a part of the festival, and it really, truly kind of blew my expectations away. I didn't expect to make such strong connections with all of the artists. We got to spend so little time together just because of the nature of the festival and events, and things go really busy, and it's very fast paced. But even within that very short period of time, we were able to build lasting connections. These are people who've become some of my very close friends just after meeting, once or twice at the festival last year. And they not only, became my close friends, they also showed me by example that, there's a place for me in the world of music, like on the music scene. I can be Asian, I can be an artist, and those two things can coexist and also lead me to be successful. So it was really exciting to be a part of all of that.
And did you perform at the Jade Music Fest in Asia too in April?
I did. Yep. In Taiwan.
And
Yes.
that, yeah, it was in Taipei. And how would you describe that experience?
That also was very magical. I didn't really plan on going to Taiwan. I thought that it wouldn't be something I could fit into my teaching schedule, but things kind of changed up. And, in the very last few weeks leading up to the festival, I was able to sort of squeeze in to the artist roster. And I'm so glad that I was able to go because it was, such a wonderful audience that received me in Taiwan. And I was so surprised because I don't have connections necessarily in Taiwan. I didn't expect there to be people who wanted to hear me perform or hear what I have to say. So to be welcomed with such, warmth and such open arms was so special. And my family, we speak at home, we speak Hokkien, and that's
Yeah, I
the
was going to
same as,
say you speak
yeah,
Hokkien, which is
yeah.
kind of Taiwanese.
Yeah, and so, to meet other young people who speak Hokkien, like here in Toronto where I am, the people who speak Hokkien are pretty much my family or family friends. So to see and meet people outside of that, and not only just people, but people who are artists doing the same work that I'm doing and sharing my mother tongue, it was just such a feeling of acceptance and validation. It's hard to explain with words, but it was very special.
That's wonderful. And I'm kind of astonished at all the hats you wear. Let's start with the vocals. What type of work do you have to do along the way in learning how to do jazz vocal improvisations?
hmm
Like you're
I think
doing
a
it on
big,
stage and it's like,
yeah.
but I wonder what goes into that.
I think a big part of it is just listening to that sort of music. When I was in jazz school, a big portion of our studies was listening to prolific jazz solos, jazz artists, both singers and instrumentalists, rhythm section players or horn players, and just learning their solos, transcribing their solos, writing them down, or even just learning them by ear and being able to repeat them back. And that just built my vocabulary around jazz. Jazz, which is, Black American music, is very much an oral tradition. And so to get into it, it's not just a matter of analyzing or understanding the theory. It's a big part of it is just listening and learning in that way. So I think having, had such a keen interest for jazz, even when I was younger, it was something that was always playing in the house and, on the radio. And so I think that sort of entered my subconscious and pervaded
I wonder
my music.
what you have to access to be able to do that. Like, is it is it a deeply emotional experience, or do you have to kind of be in the prefrontal cortex of your brain
Yeah.
and thinking of what notes you have to hit?
I wish I could, understand the science behind it, but I think really a big part of it is just being able to let go and, kind of letting go of ego and being okay with making sort of silly sounds or making mistakes, and, being comfortable with the uncomfortable in a way. I remember when I was first starting to improvise, it felt almost like embarrassing, almost like, when you get up to do like a class presentation and everyone's watching you and you're like feeling the sweat and your face is turning red. So when I first started improvising, that was very much the feeling every time. And then slowly, you after that you just start to build confidence. It's just a matter of doing it enough times that it feels almost second nature.
And how did you get into songwriting?
I think since I was little, I don't I was felt so drawn to songwriting because I loved music, and the idea that I could express what I'm feeling in a song was so appealing to me because sometimes with words it's hard to really let go. And I think I had a lot of feelings that I bottled up that didn't have anywhere to go necessarily. And so they would all just go into my songwriting. And I think I remember writing like songs with my friends when I was maybe in grade 3 or 4. And it was just lyrics and melody. And we would write these songs together and sing them together. And there would be no instruments. It would just be a set of lyrics about friendship or something. And then I think as my piano skills built up a little bit, I think when I was in my preteen years, I started just messing around on the piano and coming up with lyrics to go over top. I didn't understand what I was playing necessarily. I was just sort of finding sounds that I liked, but it was such an enjoyable process to me that it just something that I kept doing and kept doing. Hmm.
And I want to ask you about your song Did, which I
Hmm.
mentioned in the intro. What were you trying to do with this song lyrically?
I really wanted to tell a story. I, had a very specific situation in mind, and in a way, did is kind of like a letter. So it's kind of like, a letter that you write but you never send. And it's, filled with all the things that you wish you could say, but you know that there will never be a right time to say it or a right circumstance to express those things. And so it really was a place for me, a safe place for me to put all those feelings and put all those words.
Interesting. And how would you go about, I don't know if you do the lyrics first or you probably do it in different sequences depending on the song, but
Hmm.
but how do you go about writing music to reinforce the lyrics of a song like that?
Hmm. I think sometimes to reinforce the lyrics, it is to leave room for the lyrics to make space for them. And so I try to allow the accompanying pieces to be more sparse or to be more supportive as opposed to being active. And I just think really hard about, or I don't think really hard, but I try to get really go by instinct in terms of where the lyrics sit in terms of melody. So I try not to force anything. I try not to embellish too much or aim for something far-fetched or, very extreme in terms of range or flexibility. I just try to go as close to how I would speak those lyrics. And I think that's what hits the most is when the lyrics feel like it could be someone talking to you. That's when we really feel that connection.
That's interesting because at Jade Music Festival, you performed Fever, and I know it struck a really powerful chord with some in the audience. Even a BC cabinet minister, she was in cabinet, Katrina Chen, she was blown away by it. And I'm wondering what you would like people to know about that song.
I think for me it was, I had a lot of like pent up rage around dealing with people who felt like emboldened and comfortable with fetishizing me as an Asian woman, objectifying me. They felt almost entitled to that sort of behavior or language. And for so many different reasons, but a lot of the time for safety, it's not possible for me to retaliate in the moment because I would be putting myself in harm's way. And so this song was a place for me to transfer all of that, pent up rage and then just like let it go. And it felt very empowering for myself to write. At the time, it was like a little selfish. I wasn't really thinking about the impact of the song. It was more just, I need to get these feelings
So
out of my system and,
it
be
was a
done with it.
catharsis.
Yes, exactly. So, to know that, it struck a chord with other people, it really means
Oh,
a
it
lot
really
to me.
did. It did.
Hmm.
It was almost like you put into words what people, hadn't even been maybe articulated in their own mind in the same way. But it was like, now I'll move to education.
Hmm.
And because you've done a lot of that, obviously, uh, what's the secret to being a good or a great educator?
I think being empathetic and being willing to listen and also being willing to leave your ego at the door. I think for me, I always think about what my students can teach me and what they also have to offer. It's not always about, what information I have to give and, my word is something wise and special. Like I think of it as building a connection with another person. Even though there is that student teacher relationship that we must respect, there's also this sense of, we're almost equals. And I want my students to feel comfortable enough sharing with me their insecurities and the things that they want to improve and feeling comfortable, um, maybe not succeeding at certain things that we do in lessons, or maybe, being comfortable with failure. As a student and, even me as an artist, as a professional artist, there will be many failures along the way. And so if I can provide a safe space for a student to fail, I think that's really great and it gives them a chance to learn and grow.
And I'm curious, Jacqueline, how has your family history led you to, this is a big question, led
Yeah.
you to become the person you are today?
Hmm. So both my parents are Chinese. We speak Hokkien at home, and but both my parents are from Southeast Asia, and they met here in Canada. My mom's from Vietnam, and my dad is from Myanmar. And my dad is a very large musical influence in my life. He's the one who introduced me to jazz and, had it playing around in the house all the time when I was growing up, showed me the Beatles and got me into that sort of music when I was very, very young, and taught me piano as well, from when I was, I think, as young as like 3 and then all the way up into like early adulthood. And so I really am so grateful to have this, in my life. My dad was a musician in Myanmar. He came from, a very large family, and his father, my grandfather, who I unfortunately never got to meet, but he had a family band of sorts and really
Was he
impressed
from
upon.
Rangoon or?
Yeah, he was from
Uh,
Rangoon, yeah. And so he really impressed upon his family that, every kid should learn how to play an instrument or be a singer. And so my dad grew up in that sort of environment and it sort of passed down. And at the time, my dad being Chinese meant that he was not allowed, like he was prohibited from pursuing a career in medicine and in other sort of professional fields. I think the only it was very limited for him in terms of post-secondary, in terms of higher education. And so I think he could choose between like chemistry and geography, which he wasn't super excited about, but he did chemistry. And after that, he was kind of like, screw this. If I can't be a doctor, I'm just going to be a musician. And so that's how his music career
well,
started in Myanmar. Yeah.
well,
So
the
he
other
was,
interesting part is Rangoon.
mhm,
Um, now it's this closed off country, but at
yep.
the time, there was the Chinese influence, the British influence,
Yep.
the Indian
Hmm.
influence, and
Hmm.
I'm wondering if he grew up, at a time or even the residue of really it being an international city, and if that shaped him
Yep.
musically. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I think I remember he has so many stories about, um, you know, listening to the radio and trying to like catch the episodes where they played music from North America. He used to play at, North American and European embassies, and I remember he would say he would be allowed to go through like the crates and like, find different records, and that was the only source of, external musical influence for him, and it was such like a treasure to be able to get his hands on anything that was, from outside of Asia. And and he grew up in the part of Rangoon. It was like Little India, and so there's a lot of that influence as well. And he had Chinese friends who were in Burma, in Myanmar as well, and so there was very much like a very diverse sort of culture, even
Well, I'm
within the
wondering,
small
did he
city.
get, because there's also a lot of jazz in Mumbai,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
whether he picked up some of the jazz from the Indian community too. I don't know.
maybe I don't
You
know.
never know.
I think Yeah, I think for him, like there was it was so limited to get his
Hmm.
hands on something from outside. He would have to just kind of take little bits and pieces
Oh,
whenever he could, and then I think really his knowledge for jazz kind of expanded when he came here. But he always had sort of an inclination towards the more complex harmonies and rhythms.
and how about your mom? Does she have a musical background
No,
as well? Oh,
no, no. Other than I think my grandfather on my mom's side, he loved music. He was very passionate about it. He cared a lot about the arts, like about music, and he was very encouraging, when he was alive. And I think he passed away when I was 8, but when I was very young, and I would be singing for the family, he was always very encouraging in his own way, and was very supportive of my singing.
well, I hope your mom didn't have. I shudder because the experience of the Chinese in Vietnam. They went through some very, very difficult times, particularly after the war. And but one of the things it seems to me in Canada is people who trace of Chinese ancestry who trace their roots back to Southeast Asia. They're not. They've kind of been invisibilized in our country when there are actually a lot of people who were
Yeah.
in that group. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
I think a big, thing for me growing up, I grew up in Scarborough as well as Markham, and both of these communities in Ontario are very rich in terms of culture. And so, I grew up with a lot of Chinese people, Indian people, Black people, like a combination of things. And then in Markham, especially, it's very much predominantly Chinese in the part of Markham where I grew up. And so, I felt very comfortable, but at the same time, my peers, my friends could recognize that I wasn't the same type of Chinese as them.
You're a
My
minority.
upbringing was different. Yeah. So it was very strange, like to on the outside kind of look sort of the same, but that they could sort of tell that I was not the same. And yet I didn't speak the same, I didn't speak Cantonese or Mandarin at home. I went to Chinese school for Cantonese and Mandarin, but it wasn't something I was very fluent or comfortable with. And so I always felt a little bit on the outside because, my family wasn't from Hong Kong or from China. And those were the predominant sorts of, Chinese, East Asian people
That's
that
what
I
people think
was with.
of
Yeah.
Chinese in Canada. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I, and have you been writing any music, any songs in Chinese languages?
I have very recently, I put out a song called Like You, and it has some Mandarin in it. But most recently, and I'll be performing some of these on November 6th, I've been incorporating some Hokkien or Tai, like Taiwanese,
Yeah.
into my songwriting. And that's been really, I was worried that it would be very challenging because it's not something I've ever done or thought of doing in my entire life, despite, having this language around me all the time. But it felt surprisingly very natural. Hokkien is such a tonal language. There are 9 tones. And so incorporating that into a melody, it's almost like the language is dictating where your melody should go. And so that's been kind of a cool experience to play around with.
Well, that's one of the Jade musicians, Gina Lena. She did an album and she's of Taiwanese ancestry,
Hmm.
but she often sings in Mandarin and French and English. But she tried doing a Taiwanese song, the Juno-winning, the train song, children's song
Hmm.
on her children's album, and she was telling me about how um, the tonal aspect of Taiwanese it was challenging and.
Hmm.
So where do you see your career going from here, Jacqueline?
Well, I'm hoping to release more music in the coming months, a small EP and then later on a much larger album. So I'm very excited for that. And those are just my solo projects. I think I have my foot in so many so many doors. There's so many different things, different avenues to take. I see myself continuing with teaching and sort of being able to support new programs and maybe develop new programs to help students and continue with my nonprofit outreach work, which I'm really excited about. I've recently been able to sort of blend two of my worlds together, my U of T world and my nonprofit world, and they're doing a collaboration between students. So that's very exciting. And I also work with a band and we're recording some new music in the new year. And so there's lots going on. I see myself just putting more of my creative output into the world and um, finding new connections and building. And I find that my success is defined by the connections that I get to make and getting to build these new connections. I feel such a wealth of, friendship and artistic collaboration. So I'm excited to see what the new year will bring.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your time when you obviously have a busy schedule. And,
Thanks for having me. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you.
oh, it's my pleasure. On November 6th, Jacqueline Teh will perform at the Jade Music Fest. It's a free concert, and there will be other musicians of Asian ancestry there. Starts at 7:30 p.m. at Performance Works on Granville Island. And then at 10:30 a.m. the following morning at the same location, she'll be back for a free public discussion with fellow musicians Daniel Liu, Mirabelle Jen, and Darling Sparrows.